Greetings and salutations, board game fans. The Dice Pirates are back. This is episode 28. We're going to be breaking down some legacy games, really get into the nitty-gritty of the genre, what makes some games work, what really holds some of the games in this genre back. We're going to dive into that. I am Ian, your captain, as always, joined by Matt, and we are once again joined by Dr. Dennis. How you doing, Dennis?
I've kind of noticed in recent episodes you guys have stopped using nautical puns, and I'm kind of sad that I missed that boat.
Oh. I blame Matt. He's clearly slacking. That was the one job he had, and he just refuses to do it.
I've just been feeling rudderless lately. You know what I mean? Rudderless. I don't know another one. Dang it.
Oh man! All right, that's your homework. Homework for next time.
Port and starboard. Those are terms.
All right, we're gonna move on before you embarrass yourself too much. We're gonna get into our soapbox, and I actually have one that I want to talk about real quick. We've made a couple trips recently, and during our trips, we've been swinging by some like used stores. People turning, used music, used books, and used board games. And something I found is that a lot of these stores will actually have really good games in stock because often they may not know what they have necessarily, or people will turn in games that are opened, and so they might look like they've been used, but realistically they got the game, they didn't want it, they don't really play those sort of games, and they just turned it in after opening it, seeing it the huge amount of pieces, and they're like, maybe not. At one store I found several unopened copies of Seven Wonders. Betrayal was there. We found a perfectly immaculate copy of Sagrada. It's been really neat just to see how much you can find and how great the deals can be. And often they're very little used. Mostly all the pieces are there. It's definitely something to think about if you are looking to get some cheaper games, and especially as games start to go up in price. It's something to think about when you're looking for your next game.
I love that. I used to thrift store shop a lot when I was in college for like vintage T-shirts and obscure paperback books, but I never thought about board games. This was kind of like pre my board gaming days, but I love the thrill of like finding a really good buy at a thrift store or something awesome for a good deal. And now that board games are more popular, they'll probably be like recirculating into the thrift store market. It's really cool that you found some pretty good like contemporary games like Sagrada for a good price.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Matt, I know you have a reaction that you want to bring to us. What do you got?
Guys, I cannot stop thinking about this like ginormous, I don't even know how big it is, what looks to be like 15-inch tall plastic Galactus figure that CMON is trying to put out, completely stretching the definition of the word mini into absurdity. Okay, couple weeks back, CMON announced their next big Kickstarter project is going to be Marvel Zombies, a Zombicide game. Just when you thought, surely we can't come up with any more ways to do Zombicide. Oh, but wait. Yeah, they did. This time it's Marvel. It's going to be more of that dice-chunking Zombicide gameplay that you've grown to love and or tolerate. But this time, they're Marvel characters, you see? CMON is a wonderful company who makes a lot of great games that I love. But then every once in a while they just drop something like this that I'm like, this is such a blatant money grab that it's crazy. But it's so obviously this is probably not the game for me, but the most notable thing about it is one of the expansions that they've already announced, because of course before the game's out you go ahead and announce the first expansion. The first expansion is a Galactus expansion that comes with a model of Galactus that looks to be roughly like 20 times the size of a normal.
It is
miniature,
2 feet tall, 1.5 feet wide.
That's fully insane. I just keep imagining like what kind of a real goober. Can you imagine this moment like at the table when it's like, oh guys, looks like Galactus is here, and you pull this thing out from under the table like a little statue and plop it down onto the game board, this 2-foot tall monstrosity.
The table promptly collapses underneath the weight of the mini.
So the expansion is literally a box of plastic. Like,
yes.
I mean, you are paying. I couldn't even imagine how much this is going to cost to have this thing manufactured and shipped to you. This huge hunk of plastic that truly does nothing. It just sits on the table. Does it look awesome? I mean, of course it looks awesome. So no, you don't have to. We don't have to debate that. Of course it looks awesome. Does it add anything to the game? I don't know. Your mileage may vary, but it's definitely absurd. It's definitely ridiculous. It feels like a jump the shark moment to me in board gaming. Like we're gonna look back and it's like the 2-foot tall zombie Galactus mini, quote mini, is the moment that it all started to go off the rails for board gaming. But maybe not. That's my rant. I have really nothing constructive to say about it. I just can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are several Warhammer minis that are roughly the same size. You're looking at, 2 feet tall, 2 feet long. So there is precedence for this, but that is, of course, Warhammer, which I believe that's really its own space. I mean, if you're into Warhammer,
Yeah.
you are into Warhammer.
I mean, I guess that they did this with a giant Cthulhu not too long ago with Cthulhu Death May Die. So this is not really the first time, but there's just something about this Galactus that has just set me off. The other thing that I find hilarious about it is it's a zombie Galactus, which raises all sorts of questions about how does Galactus, the Reader of Worlds, even become a zombie in the context of the fiction of this. It's fully insane. I do also kind of have this vision in my mind of like in a post-apocalyptic world, these giant resin Galactuses surviving and being discovered by civilizations far in the future and wondering what is this strange deity.
We're going to go ahead and move on to our game for this week, and I actually want to do something a little bit different. So we've talked about the World Series of board gaming a couple times, and I just thought it was really fascinating concept. So I wanted to throw this to you guys. So the way that this works is you can buy a ticket, and the ticket that you buy will give you a different amount of games, a different amount of tickets that you can buy in and play. So let's say, you guys jump in, you're going to go ahead and, you're going to spend a little bit, not a ton, so you're going to get the 2 game pass. So you get 2 games, 2 opportunities to win and make it through to like the later rounds. What 2 games out of that list would you guys drop into? What do you think are your best games, and what do you think you would have the best chance of winning at?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Should we read the games really quick just for the listener so you don't have to?
Yeah, so while you guys are deciding, we'll kind of go through the games they got. It's actually quite a list. There's a lot of variation here. You got 7 Wonders, a classic. You have Acquire, Azul, Blood Rage, Brass Birmingham.
the lesser version of brass.
It's true. Carcassonne, Catan, because you can't have it without Catan, Dominant Species Marine, Dune Imperium, Gaia Project, Great Western Trail, Raw, Splendor, Terraforming Mars, Ticket to Ride, and Wingspan. So quite the list of games they have.
There's only one game on this list that I feel even remotely competent at to compete in a serious way, and I think you could guess, Ian.
I mean, I think you're going to say Blood Rage.
I'm going to 100% say Blood Rage. That's the only game out of that list that I feel comfortable with, that I really know the rules and that I'm actually could be hypothetically competitive with. I thought that I was good at Splendor. When we play Splendor together as a group, I feel competent and competitive. I feel like I've won it, or I'm in the running to win it. I started playing. Well, I beat you. I beat you at Splendor. Do we need to
I let you win, definitely.
You have never let anyone win a game in your whole life. You would die. you would absolutely die before you let anybody beat you in a board game. I've never heard you lie so hard on this podcast.
You're not wrong.
So, if that is the only thing I can say about it, is if I beat you at anything, I earned it. But no, I thought I was good at Splendor, and so I started playing it on. I think I've talked about this on the podcast. I started playing it on Board Game Arena, and quickly found out that I don't even understand how this game works. This is chaos. I've gotten just absolutely destroyed. That game's been out too long because people have like it's like Solve. Any game that's been out long enough for people to solve, you don't want to be in that.
So you're basically just jumping in on Blood Rage, and that's about it for you, huh?
I mean, if I was like gun in my head, I had to jump into another one, I would probably pick. I'd probably pick Azul, because I like that game and I feel like okay at it. But nothing else on that list I feel even remotely competent at.
That's funny because like Azul and Blood Rage were actually the two games that I like immediately gravitated towards.
That's
Like
hilarious.
Terraforming Mars is probably one of my favorite games of all time, but I've kind of realized that maybe I'm not that good at it. Like my wife beats me at it so much.
Sounds like you just need to give your tickets to her.
I mean, I just love playing that game, but
Yeah.
but I mean, Blood Rage, I think I've won that a couple times, and Azul kind of has some like some, I don't know, some chill Sudoku vibes. I love that game.
Yeah. I mean, Azul's good. There's a certain randomness to Azul that I think you could you could luck out and it could kind of go your way. You could get back into it. But like the games that I feel like honestly would be like super sweaty would honestly be these games that have been out long enough for there to be really complex strategies that people have formed. Like I bet Catan at a high level is probably unrecognizable to Catan as you play it around the table with your friends, and it's probably you probably wouldn't want anything to do with some high level Catan play. Splendor, I couldn't even imagine Ticket to Ride at this junction. That game's been out so long, and people that really know it.
Oh yeah, I'd jump into, I think Wingspan and Carcassonne would be my games of choice. I think that's what I'd go for. Wingspan because I feel like I get that game in a way, and I've been playing Carcassonne. That was my start in board game was Carcassonne, so I've been playing that for a couple decades now.
Yeah, I've only played Carcassonne 2 times. That's a weird blind spot in my thing. I'm shocked at Dune Imperium being on this list.
They had to jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
So I am curious as one follow-up to this. So let's say you get your 2 games, you've made it through, you're in the finals now. And the way that this works is that you are guaranteed to not play the games that you won beforehand. So you have to be good at multiple games. So in this final, you don't get to play the 2 games you picked, but you also get the opportunity to veto a single game from the list. What is the game that you would fear most playing in a final?
Dennis, what are you thinking? What do you think?
I would never play Blood Rage in a final because that game can crush you, and I'm not good enough at it.
Yeah.
I might say Brass Birmingham.
Oh yeah?
I think so.
I don't know that. I don't know what's different about that one from the one from Brass Lancaster. Brass Worcestershire.
So Brass Worcestershire. Brass Lancashire is more on the Euro side, and Brass Birmingham is more on the Ameritrash side, is the way I've heard it described.
So it has zombies.
Zombies with top hats.
I'd play that actually. Gentlemen Zombies, is that a game? Did we just invent something? All right, okay, so there's several games on here that I've never played, so they would all be. Wouldn't even know what to expect. Dominant Species Marine. I've actually never even heard of Acquire. Is that a classic game that I just am totally unaware of?
Gotta be honest, I'm going to show my ignorance here, but I'm actually not sure, so I can't give you.
I don't know what Acquire is. Dominant Species Marine, Great Ocean Trail. I've never played Raw. So there's several on here I've never played, so I couldn't know for sure. But I think what I would veto would actually be. This is going to sound crazy. I would veto Wingspan.
Wow.
I don't. My enthusiasm for Wingspan is entirely rooted in playing with all the little toys and looking at the pictures and reading the bird facts. Like playing Wingspan to play it in earnest and try to like actually win feels like torture to me. I feel like all the game's worst qualities would be on display. I
just read the description of Acquire. Invest, divest, and stage hostile takeovers in this classic real estate game.
Ooh. I'm not going to lie, that sounds quite interesting.
I'm going to divest and play in that. CMON's next Kickstarter actually is going to be Acquire: Zombies. It's going to have a 2-foot tall like zombie version of Mr. Moneybags from Monopoly.
Yes. Oh, man. So that's the game for this week. I just wanted to try do something a little bit different, have some fun with that. We are going to move on to our main discussion where we're going to be breaking down some legacy games for you. So we will get to that in just a second.
All right, and welcome back to the Dice Pirates, where we're going to go ahead and dive into our main topic this week, which is games you don't just play once and put on the shelf, but games you play over and over again, and that is legacy games. A growing and now almost sort of ubiquitous trend in board games. It's the idea of games that evolve and change with you and grow over time, sometimes telling a complex story or gaining complex new rules and adjustments. They can be a lot of fun. They can also misfire in different ways. So we thought we were going to break that down and take a look at our experience with legacy gaming. Ian, why don't you kick us off and get the discussion going?
Yeah, so we wanted to dive into the legacy genre because it's one of those interesting game-like designs that sort of transcends other genres because you can have lots of different games that use this idea. Really, the legacy genre began with Risk Legacy. What if each game of Risk actually affected the next game you played? Instead of it being just a isolated game, what if the choices you make actually affect things as you move forward? And so that was really the idea behind Risk. Originally, the creator of Risk Legacy actually was thinking about doing a Clue legacy game, fascinatingly enough, because his idea was, well, why do the same people keep ending up at the same house? Like, how does that make any sense? And he thought, what if we built a storyline off of that? And that didn't end up happening, but he moved to Risk, and there was an attempt to build a story through the various games that were told. Now, Risk Legacy did kind of famously get a little bit messy with its story, and things kind of got crazy towards the end of it. But there's been a lot of different games that have used this. Scythe has done this. A lot of the popular like RPG type games that we have now, like Gloomhaven and Descent, these are also legacy games. They build on each other. You have Pandemic Legacy, one of the most popular legacy games. So there's lots of different ways that different genres of games, different types of experiences have used the legacy game. And so we just kind of wanted to compare and contrast them a little bit and say, so what works? How have different games kind of taken that idea and run with it? How have they made it better? How is it maybe detracted from the game? Is it always a good thing to add? And so we kind of wanted to look at the various mechanics that are used. Obviously, there's a progression. Things have to change from game to game based on what's happened. A lot of them will also use the cards that you're playing with. Some games will have you destroy cards. Some games will have you add more cards in. So there's going to be a changing like resources that you'll often be working with. There's a lot of stuff. Dennis, for you, what really makes a legacy game? Like when somebody says this is a legacy game, what are you looking?
I mean, it's going to be something fresh from session to session. It's going to be a familiar game, so you don't have to relearn the rules every time you sit down and play. But something unexpected is going to happen that's going to keep you hooked and looking forward to that next session. I think that probably defines legacy games for me.
So obviously you're looking for that. So we're going to jump right into it. And I think it could be worthwhile to start with one of the most popular games out there. If we start with Pandemic Legacy. Dennis, this is one that you've played through. You've played the season 1, I believe. I think you might be in season 2, but obviously one of the most lauded legacy games out there, really helped to make it a popular way to play games. And how does that use the legacy format in a way that really benefits it?
So, sure. So, with Pandemic Legacy, I mean, you're starting out with base game, Pandemic. If you ever played Pandemic before, I mean, the first session, you're literally, you've got 4 viruses and you're trying to stop them and find a cure and save the world. And then it very quickly goes off the rails. Like, if I remember right, I think it's the first session, like the whole game just like turns upside down. All of a sudden you have a virus that you can't cure anymore. Oh no, what are you going to do? It's infecting everything. Like countries are shutting down. And it's, and when we started playing it, last year, I believe, so right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was eerie how closely that game tracked with events in the real world.
What a lovely piece of escapist entertainment. Let's escape from the difficult day to day in this game of global pandemic and terror.
But I mean, so after that first, big twist, there are several other like major twists in that game that I don't want to spoil that really keep you hooked. I mean, you think you have a handle on it, and then the game throws something at you that just comes out of left field and, completely turns the paradigm upside down. So you're still playing Pandemic, but you're not still playing Pandemic. You're playing something new and exciting.
I gotta be honest, I don't know what the big twist is in Pandemic. I have successfully managed to avoid it for many years now. I still haven't played Pandemic Legacy, but there's something looming over this game that must make it really good, because
I mean, it's not just the most popular Legacy game. It's number 2 on Board Game Geek overall.
Exactly. Because even if you, because I'm trying to think in my mind, so even if you were playing a variant of Pandemic that changed the rules a little bit and like amped up the stakes in various ways and maybe even added a little bit of narrative, like that would probably be fun, but would it be like greatest game of all time fun? So whatever the twist is, it must be pretty good. It must really shake things up and make the game feel wild.
It's pretty good. And then season 2, I know that kind of was a mixed, had some mixed reviews for a lot of folks, but I'm about halfway through it and we're really loving it. I mean, the premise of season 2 is what would happen if the world ended after season 1, like the heroes didn't save the day, and it's like it's like 100 years in the future, and you're left trying to rebuild humanity, and it's
grim,
and that really completely changes that game does change the base mechanics of Pandemic in a meaningful way.
So that's interesting. So it sounds like the first season really just keeps the main mechanics. So how does, like you said, each game really feels fresh and like you're doing something different and throw stuff. How does it keep it fresh? Like, is it just, obviously without spoiling too much, it changes the rules and sort of the framework you're allowed to work within, stuff like that? Like, I imagine as countries close off, maybe you can't move around the map as freely, stuff like that. Like,
it limits, certain things can limit your movements, your characters. So at the start of the game, you're going to pick a character that you're going to play, from game session to game session. So your character might gain, scars if something bad happens to them that can limit their actions. They might gain special powers. Your character might even die if you are very unlucky. And then you have to basically, make a new character to play in future sessions. I mean, you're constantly opening, little hatches and little doors to add mechanics to the game, or to change things on the map. And, yes, there's definitely, destruction of cards. The first time we had to tear up some cards, it was Pandemic Legacy was really the first Legacy game, we've played. And that was kind of that moment I won't forget. Like, we actually have to rip this thing up? Yes, the rules say rip it up.
That's like, that kills me as a board gamer.
That's something we haven't talked about, but that is integral to what has become kind of the Legacy experience. This... both this feeling of opening up sealed packages and boxes, so creating a sense of surprise out of the board gaming, and then also destroying or permanently altering. Not every game has you rip up, but a lot of games incorporate stickers or a marker or something so that you permanently change some part of the board. And I think there are two brilliant things about that. And we haven't really said his name, but it needs to be said. Rob Davio, who created Risk Legacy and also designed Pandemic Legacy, is sort of he basically created the modern our modern understanding of what a Legacy game is, and he founded these two kind of key elements, and they're genius in like two ways, because for better or worse, one of the things that happens with a board game is after you open it up and you punch all of the components out and you read the manual and you set it all up, the minute before you've even played the game, you've seen everything that the game has to offer. It's one of the big differences between board gaming and video gaming is there's no surprises in most board games. Like, you literally have a full understanding of everything in the box and how it's all going to come into play. So these little tuck boxes and little sealed bags create surprise, which is something that's never really been there before. And then just this whole thing of like permanently changing the game, that runs totally counter to our mind of like never damaging or altering the board. The board is sacred. The cards are sacred, like to tear up a card and take it out of the game, like that makes that already puts you in a tense place as a gamer and shakes your expectations up. So These were brilliant design flourishes that he added to these games that we've seen repeated time and time again. I think it's part of the appeal and what makes legacy gaming so exciting.
So one thing I want to springboard off is the idea that Pandemic does incorporate this really like fleshed out story and it builds. And there's a lot of games we want to talk about, but I kind of want to go to, I think for us, the other end of the spectrum, and I want to talk about Scythe because, of course, Scythe is a great game. I love playing that game, but we played the legacy version of that game. I believe we played 8 or 9 sessions worth, where we go through, and I think we all kind of left with a little bit of a bitter taste in our mouths. Me, maybe less so because I won the whole thing, not to brag. But
Humble brag.
but that is I do think we all sort of felt like it didn't serve the game, and in some ways actually maybe detracted. Matt, I know you have a lot of feelings about this one. So where do you think where do you think that fell, and why didn't legacy gaming work for Scythe in the same way?
Well, I mean, I think the simple fact that it was trying to retrofit legacy elements into a game that wasn't really designed for it. And I think that just didn't work. Because at the end of the day, you were just playing 10 plus sessions of Scythe over and over again. And the surprises and elements that were added to the game were much more limited than the types of surprises and elements that you see being added in other legacy games. So to kind of jump ahead, like another one of the games that we played together as a group is Charterstone, and we'll kind of break it down in more detail probably in a few moments. But in Charterstone, when you add something new to the board, it's a new component that didn't exist before. It's a new move or a new wrinkle to the game's mechanics that wasn't there before. And so each session of Charterstone over time it becomes a progressively more complex and interesting game. The last few sessions of Charterstone are totally different than the first couple of sessions of Charterstone. And I think that's more what you're looking for out of a legacy game. If you're going to ask me to play this 15 times in a row, it needs to be getting fresh. It needs to be getting more interesting as it goes along. And Scythe Legacy was just Scythe over and over and over again. And if you love Scythe, it's probably fine. But if you don't particularly love Scythe, or if you think Scythe is just okay, it's going to wear thin after a while. Because even a great game like Scythe, you can only play it so many times week after week before like it just starts to feel repetitive.
So like my thoughts on Scythe Legacy, I think maybe when we played it, maybe we rushed through it too fast. Like I don't think we read all of the story elements. I think in just playing it, week after week, like you said, it got kind of repetitive. And me, I love, and I know you do too, Matt. We both love a good story.
Yes.
And I think we kind of did the abridged version of that campaign. It's
Yeah.
almost like we bought a fine wine and then chugged it.
Well, you're probably not wrong. I do think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that what that game probably had going for it, what it adds to Scythe is not so much that legacy experience of an evolving gameplay, because it does add new types of units and things, but none of them feel like that they really shake the game up. It's just Scythe. It still feels like just Scythe. But what that game does add is an overarching story to the experience of playing Scythe. And Scythe is a very evocative game. It's got this really immersive setting, but it's never really had a narrative before. And so the idea of playing multiple sessions of Scythe that tell a story was pretty novel. But you're right, we blew through that. We didn't take the time to read the narrative passages from the campaign book, and we didn't get a chance to get to know these people. So when major characters started showing up in the last 2 or 3 acts, I was kind of like, all right, who's this guy? Why does he have a weird
Why do we care about him?
Why do we care about him?
Yeah, I think to jump off that a little bit though, like the reason I think the story maybe felt kind of off is also the story often negatively impacted the game to a certain extent, and maybe this comes down from the information. Maybe we intentionally didn't read far enough to get the full scope, but there's a couple, to spoil it a little bit, there's a couple different scenarios within the Scythe Legacy where when a certain action is taken, the game ends that round. It immediately ends. And that was something going into those rounds we didn't know that would end the game immediately. We were not aware that that would happen. Now, maybe that was us not reading far enough into it, but regardless, the story, when we got to the story cut us off. And because we weren't ready for it, it made that experience of playing that round genuinely terrible. Because, I mean, Scythe is all about building your engine, moving forward, becoming this
Yeah.
inexorable force. And if the game could end at any time, you have to be ready for that. And because we weren't, it made it feel really bad. And so I
Yeah.
think like when you're building an overarching story, that could have been us doing it incorrectly, but I think you need to make sure that the story's not getting in the way of the game. And I do think that there were a lot of times in the Scythe Legacy campaign that the story kept you from enjoying the game.
The choices that we as the players made in that campaign didn't matter in the end. If you guys remember in the last game session, whoever wins the last game session wins the whole campaign. It's like
Yeah.
it's like the ending of Mass Effect 3. You go through all that and then do you pick red, blue, or green?
Yeah, it
You know.
felt it was pretty binary in the end. I did forget though. There is one thing that it adds that I had mixed feelings about over the course of the game. It does change the core Scythe formula in one way, in that you get these little upgrade tokens that you add to your pool that give you some extra actions or bonuses that you can do. And it's all designed to get your engine like going faster. Like maybe you get some extra money or resources, or you get a card that lets you take like an action for free. Not a card, a little token that you cash in, and you buy these with points or money that you accrue over the course of each session. I think those actually kind of broke Scythe a little bit, because I noticed our games of Scythe that we played when we were playing the Legacy campaign were really fast and kind of nasty, because people were able to build up really quickly and start spreading around the map, and there was a lot more. I don't know. Scythe, I think, is meant to be more of a slow burn, where people inch toward conflict a little bit more tentatively. But when people are like ramping up their production really fast in like just a few turns, and next thing you know, mechs are just like charging across, it really changed Scythe in a way that made it less fun. So this is one of the rare moments where I think a legacy variation did not improve the core game all that much. I would say that if you're an absolute diehard fan of Scythe, getting the legacy box is probably still worth it, because you get a bunch of new units, a bunch of cool stuff that you could then incorporate into a base game of Scythe.
And it's the only legacy game I know of that, you open up the instructions and it literally says, hey, by the way, this whole campaign is optional. You can just tear everything open right now and add it to the base game.
One thing that we kept saying as we were playing through it was that it felt in many ways like a tutorial of it felt like a tutorial of the various expansions that you can get. And so to kind of jump off of that, I want to talk about another game that in many ways some have criticized as just an extended tutorial. And I want to talk about Charterstone, because that's a game that Matt, I've played it through almost 3 times now, I think,
Wow.
with various groups. I've come to really like that game, and people have said that it is just an extended tutorial of the game, because each time you're adding something new, like you said, as you gain new cards, you're going to change the game, which really, because that's the whole concept of Charterstone as a game. You each have, in some ways, it's like a city building game where you have your patch of land, and as you progress through the game, you're going to build new buildings that give you further actions to do. And you can place your workers there, you can place your workers on other people's buildings, all this sort of stuff. And so as the game progresses, people continue to build more buildings. There are more actions that become available on the map. Your own little charter that you can build becomes better and better and better as you gain synergies that you can work through. You can gain more and more points. So you really begin to speed up. It's a very long form engine builder in many ways. And so as you add these new buildings, new cards come out every time you build buildings, you gain new abilities, you gain new workers, all new cards, new ways to score, all these sorts of things. So it is kind of a tutorial in a sense. But one of the things that I think makes it different is that like the journey is the game, not so much the destination, because you have the option to play with your finished charter at the end, but without the cards and the characters that you've built up, it kind of feels kind of soulless. And I think a part of what makes that game so fun is working with the stuff that you have and feeling it progress and moving forward. So the journey really makes that game in a lot of ways. Matt, how did you feel about this game as we played it?
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I see the criticism of like, oh, it's basically a tutorial. It's basically a game that's teaching you how to play the more fully realized version of itself that will exist at the end of the game when you've added everything to the board. But I kind of like that as a model for a legacy game, right? Because if you just started with like, I don't know, the full like robust version of Charterstone, the first game, and then you were just being asked to play it like it's that same thing of like you're just going to play this 10, 15 times in a row. And the only thing that's going to change about it is maybe some small elements of the board, or you get extra, your characters that you have, or whatever. If nothing really was changing over the course of the game, it would get super boring. But the fact is that each time you sit down to play Charterstone, it gets a little bit more complex. It starts out as a very, very basic worker placement game, probably too basic for most serious gamers, and that's probably why people bounced off of it. Those first couple sessions, it's just like, really, this is a Stonemeyer game? There's not a lot going on. Well, it's because the world's not been fully like built up. So it starts out as a very simple worker placement game that gets a little bit more complex. A few more layers to the parfait are getting added with every game, and by the end, you got a fully realized thing. It wins a lot of favor too in my mind because of just how darn charming it is. It has, some people probably take it or leave it on the art, but I think it's charming. I think watching your little settlement build up is great. I think your little villagers that you acquire and name. If you're a type of person that starts building little stories in your head about who everybody is and what's going on, and I still remember I had the little brick civilization, and we were like the proud like bricklaying people, and like I was actually, by the end of the game, I knew I was kind of not winning it, so I was making choices about the buildings to acquire just based on like the thematic idea I had in my head of what like kind of town I was building, and they didn't even make sense like engine building wise, but I was like, I don't want a chocolate factory, we don't have chocolate here, we're brick people,
The famous
like,
pumpkin and a brick song.
pumpkin and a brick walking down the street. That classic song.
We still sing that every time we play Charterstone. It's amazing. The game allows you to build, like you said, you build these stories because you're in the same charter, because you can see other people building them the same way. You start to, the entire like group of you have this story that you work on together. In many ways, there is an overarching story that the game does have, but it's kind of bare bones. But the best part and what I think makes this game a fun legacy game is the discovery. It's less about, you're not actually getting rid of cards, you're not tearing anything up. But what it does have is there's essentially a chest that sits on the side, and so there's a big chest full of cards when you start the game, and you look at it and you're like, oh, so we're going to go through like all of that. And as you begin to make choices, as you build buildings, you begin to open these, and that's one of the most fun parts of the game, especially when you're playing around a table with a lot of people, is, oh, somebody's opened a chest. What do we got coming out? Oh, we got minions this time. Oh man, what do these do? What is this building? How do I get that? What is this effect? Oh, we got items now,
Yeah.
New objectives. The fun, it's like opening a Christmas present every time you get a new box. And that's the discovery that the game allows you to have every game you play multiple times a game is one of the best parts of it.
Yeah, by the time like robots and golems like show up, like the world of the game has like really widened like quite a bit. So I mean, I like it. I could totally see why some people don't like it. The look of the game may be too cartoony. Those first few sessions before the layers of complexity build up might be so elementary that some people just bounced hard off of it and thought this is a huge waste of time, but you kind of have to stick with it. And the story, I will say this about the story, it's a good story. It actually, there's a dramatic moment that happened when we played the game that is still one of the like few times in the history of gaming that I can remember where something happened, everybody gasped around the table. It was truly amazing, but it does run out of steam and doesn't actually build. I mean, there's a story about, gosh, it's been so long since I played it, Ian. What is it, like the Eternal King or the Immortal King or something?
Yeah, there's an eternal king who you begin to learn things about, who may not be as benevolent as you think, or maybe he is. A lot of it
Yeah.
depends on whether you anger him or please him. There's choices there, but it does start to
It,
peter
runs out
out.
of steam. It feels like it's building up towards something a lot more epic than ultimately happens. It just kind of, in the end, you just kind of play one last massive game of Charterstone, and somebody is crowned the winner, and that's okay. That's just fine. So I think this is a good one. I think it is. I think it in its own way. I think it is a different approach to a game. It doesn't have quite the narrative wow of a Pandemic Legacy, I don't think, but it does. It layers on complexity in a way that justifies like multiple plays.
Yeah. The last thing I think I would say about it is that the map actually is two-sided. The board is two-sided, and when you're done playing, you can send in for replacements of the cards you used. You save the copies of when you bring new stuff out, and you can just flip the board over and play again if you want to start from the beginning, which I think is really nice. It keeps you from having to buy the game again, and it keeps it fresh, which is pretty cool. But it is interesting that you do have a game on the far end like Pandemic Legacy being so great in terms of story, and then something like Charterstone, which honestly you may take it or leave it. So it's interesting how story can kind of factor into that. So that's something we did talk about a little bit a couple episodes ago. We were talking about near and far and above and below, where my wife and I did go through the near and far campaign, and that's similar in some ways to the Scythe where the Scythe campaign where it doesn't add a ton. It does add the ability to gain extra story, but you do find that the story can sometimes get choppy because you're not gaining all of it because you have to play the game in a potentially suboptimal way if you really want to experience it, and you have to play it almost as a cooperative like storytelling experience if you want to get the most. So sometimes there can be a mixed bag when you look at story in board games. So I want to focus on, you know, a game that of course is almost all story. If we look at Gloomhaven, which is, definitely a legacy game, you're constantly, progressing on it. In many ways, it's, one of the RPG games that we have, similar to things like Descent and stuff like that, where it kind of has to be a legacy game. But of course, it is still a legacy game, and it's very much based around its story. We played a bit of that together, guys. How do you feel that compares to some of these?
I mean, I guess you brought up an interesting point about the RPG aspect. I mean, maybe you could make the argument that Dungeons and Dragons is the original legacy game. But not everybody, has the time or, the energy to sit down and study, 6 different, player handbooks and put together encounters and, be a dungeon master for a group of players. So Gloomhaven, I think, really kind of fits that bill for people that just don't have the time to devote to a proper role-playing game.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's an interesting point. The idea that Dungeons and Dragons was the original legacy game, but it does sort of I think it is sort of applicable to a certain extent in the idea that it's a game that you're going to get together with friends and play over a long period of time, and it's the same game every week, but it's also very different by the nature of it being improvised and random. But how do you put that in a box? Gloomhaven, as much as anybody, cracked that formula of how to put a role-playing game in a box, and they did it by giving you a really long, complex, branching narrative storybook to play around with, and a bunch of modular pieces that you could assemble together to make different dungeons and adventures. And they gave you a way to kind of bring a Dungeons and Dragons like experience to life. And for the most part, I think they really succeeded. We've talked about Gloomhaven on the show. I like it and I don't love it. I've got my mixed feelings about it. My biggest sort of complaint is that it did it to me the basic power progression of Gloomhaven runs counter to what I want out of a good role playing game, which is that instead of feeling like more powerful, if you don't make the right choices about what cards to bring into your hand when you go into a particular scenario, you actually feel like you've gotten weaker and worse off. And the more cards you're getting in your pool, the more difficult it is to make smart choices about what to do as you proceed. The game actually becomes increasingly stressful for me the longer you play and the more you develop your character, which doesn't feel like how that should work.
It's interesting that in many ways it's the most non-linear of the legacy games we're talking about, and understandably so. I think it needed to be successful in the way that it is, but you can really do whatever you want in the way you can't really do in any of these other games. I mean, Charterstone does give you choices in what you can do, and each time you play the campaign, it's going to be different, but that's purely based on what you're given and what you're able to do minute to minute, whereas Gloomhaven really is just about as open as it can possibly be. Once you get past the original couple quests that you have and you go through, it really kind of opens up And I mean, I think in many ways for me it was almost too much because I find the same thing. That's why I barely play any RPGs at all. That's why I've never played Skyrim, because it gets to that moment where it opens up and I'm like, that's too many choices. I have to do all of them, or I will do none of them, and so I choose none of them, and then I leave. So, but I think a lot of people really liked that it took the legacy format and it expanded it to astronomical proportions. It just said not only do your choices matter, your choices are whatever you want them to be. They are infinite.
Yeah, that is a really great point, and that's something that I don't think we have said on the show before about the game. It's a great observation. Is that it does recreate the feel of an open world role playing game as much as you can on like paper, because it doesn't take you to. I guess we should probably, for people that never played it, it's not just a series of like linear like mission 1, mission 2, mission 3, and you flip your way through the book, which is what a lot of like story driven campaign games do. And I guess that would probably be the key difference between a quote unquote campaign game and a legacy game. This game is you get multiple like potential quests you could do in any given session, and you pick the one that makes sense for your story or what your character wants to do, and you go to that place on the map, and the outcome of that may open up different options. So it really is a little bit like a forking series of like paths. It's pretty brilliant. That's a great part of it. It's just at the end of the day, you're still just kind of playing this very repetitive card-driven card play game that's very thinky, but almost too much for me.
What I think is really interesting about it, though, is that it does retain some of the removal aspects that various legacy games have. Like, I know, Dennis, you were playing a character when we began, and as we moved through the campaign, your character hit an endpoint in their journey, and
Yes.
you proceeded to play a secondary character. So we actually took a character and just removed it from the game. We didn't have the opportunity to go back to that character. And that's, that can be for good and bad. I like that they commit to the progression and to actually having like consequences as you move forward in story arcs. But I remember like it kind of changed the way you had to play, and it didn't necessarily make it more fun depending on what you get.
Right. I was, I liked my little rattling character that I had for the first, 8 or 9 sessions that we played, and then ironically, the character I got was a doctor, and I just did not like playing him because his special power was he handed out medical packs, which so one key mechanic of Gloomhaven is that the players are all competing against each other. So if somebody gets loot, it's their loot. It is not the party's loot. So for this character to be handing out medical packs to other teammates and getting nothing in return, just I don't know.
That I remember when you unlocked that character, and it really was like a weird change in the dynamic of how we were playing the game, because Gloomhaven does have this kind of quasi competitive thing where the party is working together, but you're sort of racing to get gold and loot ahead of the other players. It's a little bit cutthroat in a way that I think some people might bounce off of, but to suddenly be playing a support class in that is probably a bit weird and a bit jarring. I had a similar thing where I went from playing a rogue to that character retired, and I unlocked this bizarre insect guy that was sort of a magic user, and it had a weird. It took my interest out of the game. I think the retirement system is one where it takes the legacy game element of surprise and maybe doesn't use it to the player's advantage. Because what happens in Gloomhaven is when you complete a certain objective for the character you're playing, that character retires, and you get to open a little secret box and unlock a new character that you're going to play. But you don't know what that character is, and it might be something that you don't like, and that can be kind of lame. So that's where I think sometimes in a legacy game, you want surprises, but you don't want to foist the surprise onto the player that maybe forces them to play in a way that they don't want to play.
Yeah, going back to Scythe just for a second, that's one of the things where as you go through the campaign, you unlock new factions, and people are given the opportunity to change their faction. The person who discovers it can change to that faction. You have the opportunity at various moments to change back if you don't like that. So they give you ways to work around that, because sometimes you do get a version of like the game. Sometimes you do just get a character that plays the way you don't want to play. But I am curious, Matt, as to how that potentially differs from a game like Descent, because I know that you and Max did play through a campaign of Descent at one point. So is that like, how does that differ from something like Gloomhaven? Do you feel like that there's benefits to it, or?
So I'll say this. I wanted to bring up Descent because it is a sort of an early, like proto version of a legacy experience. But it is more of a campaign game, and there are some distinctions between those. So, but with Descent, which is a dungeon crawl like experience, just like Gloomhaven, they dropped an app sort of late in the life of Descent Second Edition that would allow you to play cooperatively and take you through a scripted narrative series of dungeons and encounters, and let you have that Dungeons and Dragons like experience with a game, managing your inventories and the shops and the music and the story and all these other things that happen, and running all the encounters and the monsters. I think it worked really, well. It wasn't a true legacy game in the way that we're describing it, in the sense that it doesn't have those secrets, it doesn't have those hidden boxes, it doesn't have those kind of permanent changes to the game state. But it does tell a really good narrative story that sort of justifies playing multiple sessions of the same game for like weeks on end. And it took you through a classic story that ended in a big dungeon crawl and fighting a dragon at the end. And it was really, really fun. And you got the sense of your character progressing and getting more powerful. You acquired more gear and all these things. There are quasi-branching choices that you can make. There are side quests that you can play, and you can pick them up in different orders. But it's not anywhere near as sophisticated as the branching quest system of Gloomhaven, but it is a little more narratively satisfying and cohesive, and I really recommend it. I think it kind of it was a lot of fun. If you want that a role playing like experience that's a little closer to D&D with dice rolling and other things, I think it's worth a look.
I think it's genuinely just very interesting to see how wide the scope can be, because of course, I mean, the legacy game is something that spans a lot of different genres, and so you have so many different ways that it can be implemented. And of course, there's continually more games coming out. I mean, Gloomhaven came out and changed a lot of the way that was done. Risk Legacy is actually going to have a new game come out, and a second edition of that's going to change a lot, and it's going to try and update on the things the first one did, and make it more fun. So there's still a lot of interesting things happening, because you can get different genres jump in. Like, it really allows you to play with various versions of making your choices count, which I think is really exciting, and I think there's a lot of games that really do benefit from that.
So let me ask you guys an off-the-wall question here. What game that we play now would you guys want to have turned into a legacy game?
That's a good question. Oh, I like that. What game? I feel like I want to go look at my shelf of board games right now.
I mean, I think it's obvious. Wingspan Legacy. I mean, it's just, you have
Wingspan Legacy.
you unlock new birds, you unlock new bird powers. I mean, suddenly, plot twist: an avian flu is like wiping out the bird population. You've got a race to find a cure. Galactus shows up. I think the possibilities are endless with Wingspan Legacy.
So there's a lot of games that immediately pop to mind, but actually I think it'd be really interesting to see a legacy version of either Terraforming Mars or On Mars, one of the Mars-based games. Those two in particular, I think would be really interesting, especially Terraforming Mars, if you had some form of progression from the last game, some way that maybe Mars was already affected in a way, and you have to build off of that. Maybe the game is broken down into smaller pieces, so instead of doing the whole process of terraforming Mars at once, you're doing a small little bit of it, and then where you got to that time will actually affect where you start the next round, and how do you as a corporation do progressively each time? How can you move forward, and where you get maybe you can get grants based on how well you did. Like if you're lagging behind, the governments on Earth want, they want competition, so you get extra grants to make sure that you can catch up. And if you're super far ahead, then you don't get a lot of help, but you already have a lot of,
Yeah.
Oh, that's
infrastructure
pretty cool.
built up. I think that'd be awesome. I
That
think
would
a
be
Terraforming
awesome.
Mars Legacy would be very cool.
My thought was Dinosaur Island.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just you start off with like some pretty basic dinosaurs, and accidents happen. You create some genetic monstrosities. I mean, there's
Sure.
just so many cool possibilities with that.
Yeah. And then there's zombie dinosaurs, and then Galactus shows up. The possibilities are endless. A game that I am shocked never got a legacy variant when it was sort of in the zeitgeist is Dead of Winter. That feels prime to me to run as a legacy, where you take the experience of building up the colony and play it out over multiple play sessions. Imagine the tension of like the trader, but like it playing out over weeks and months, and you still not knowing like who the trader is, and
Wow.
and then maybe you have like parts of the board that get overrun by zombies, and you can't even go to those locations anymore until you make some drastic push to get them out or something. I mean, that feels like there could be a lot of ways to do a legacy. There's got to be a legacy zombie game. Is that not a thing? Do we need to invent that? Are we sitting on a gold mine right here?
There you get on it, Matt. That's such a fun question. I would love to see some of those come out. We got to get on that, guys. That is going to be our episode on Legacy Games, though. Thanks, Dennis, for joining us, of course. Very happy to have you on.
Glad to be here, guys.
Just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. This is going to be our last episode of 2021. We're taking our extended Christmas break. We will be back in January. Give ourselves a little bit of time to reset, recharge, and of course the holidays are just crazy anyways, and everyone's going to be traveling. It's going to be busy, so we're going to take a break. We'll be back, but we are excited to do more episodes after that. If people do want to get in touch with us, Matt, where can they do that?
You can find us, as always, on Instagram at Dice Pirates, and keep up with what we're doing. Follow us and keep up with what cool games we get for Christmas. Who knows? The possibilities are endless, which is a phrase I've said 3 times on this episode.
Gonna be a lot of fun new stuff to play this next year for sure. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you to everyone who listens. I want to give a quick shout out to New Zealand, who is actually our second most popular country now after the United States. So that's pretty cool. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Kiwis. That's awesome.
Pretty exciting. So thank you to everyone for listening. We're excited to come back. Of course, keep an eye out for when we do return. We're excited to do that. But until then, we'll be right here on the Dice Pirates.